When I was younger and had more time on my hands, I used to volunteer one overnight shift a week at a charity shop in a major US city. It was one of those donation centers where people drop off old clothes, furniture, or junk they don't want anymore. Most of my job was sorting through piles of useless crap, organizing them in bins, tossing out the broken stuff, and tagging the rest for the floor. One night, I was sorting through a box of old VHS tapes. Tons and tons of older movies from the days before DVDs and streaming. For those of you too young to remember, not only were movies sold on tape back then, but you could also record your favorite programs to tape, or even buy camcorders to record your own videos to tape. One of the movies in this enormous collection was just like that, a blank black videotape. It had no title, just a date written on a piece of faded masking tape. July 14th, 1998. In retrospect, I don't know why I was so focused on that one. Probably because it was the only tape in that collection that wasn't an actual cinema film. To be totally upfront, we usually just toss those into the trash without further investigation, because nobody wants to buy somebody's old home movies, and there's always a chance it could be something inappropriate. However, I was working alone that night, and instead of just throwing it out of curiosity, I took it to the break room where we had an old TV VCR set up. I popped it in. The footage was pretty grainy, low quality, and obviously something someone had recorded for themselves, like a home movie. Whoever shot it was outside. They were in a park just filming things. Families sitting on blankets, kids running around. You could hear a man breathing behind the camera, whispering to himself while he was filming, panning across the scene. Right when I was about to press stop and eject the tape to throw it away, the camera stopped on a young woman. She was sitting alone on a bench, reading. She didn't seem to notice that she was being filmed. The camera slowly zoomed in and just stayed there, watching her face. You could hear whoever was filming this start to breathe heavier. The camera lingered there, and when I say lingered, I mean for a long, long time. It got to the point where I felt uncomfortable watching it because it was clear this woman didn't know this was happening, and the person filming her was a total stranger. Then, it cut to black. The screen flickered, and suddenly it was nighttime. The camera was moving now, walking through some bushes past illuminated windows in what looked like a backyard. It rounded the corner of a wall, and through the shaky frame I saw a house dimly lit. We were looking through a window on the first floor at someone inside. It was the same woman from the park. She was just doing regular things, picking up around the house before bed, unaware that someone was outside watching. Again, the camera zoomed in and you could hear this guy breathing. The footage cut to black again. Then it came back. The camera was now at the back door of the house. He was standing there, just looking at the handle of the door, waiting. Another cut. Now he was inside the house. A dim flashlight beam moved through the hallway, creeping up the stairs, and then clicked off. The camera silently floated up the stairs in pitch darkness, quietly peering into various rooms of grainy darkness. Then the camera turned and focused on what must have been the bedroom door. Cut to black. When it came back, the only light in the room was the moonlight through the window. The woman was asleep in her bed. The camera was filming her from the edge of her bed. You could hear the guy filming it breathing heavily, like his heart rate was up or something, even though the camera was just hovering there. The flashlight flicked on, landing right on her face. She stirred and shifted a little, but didn't wake up. Then, whoever was behind the camera began to moan just as the screen cut to black. I sat there, staring at the TV, feeling sick. This wasn't some old home movie, this was real. The next clip started, and the setting was completely different. The camera was stationary, like it had been set on a tripod. The same woman now sat on a dirty mattress in what looked like an abandoned basement or warehouse. The walls were cracked and crumbling, with fluid running down them and paint peeling. The lighting was dim, like a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. She was obviously terrified. Her face was bruised, her hair was a mess. She started speaking, but her voice was shaky, like she was repeating something she'd been told to say. She said her name, her age, and the date. I paused the tape and opened the door to the VHS slot. The date she gave was 2 days after the date written on the tape. My hands were shaking as I hit play again. The woman stopped talking. She glanced off camera like she was waiting for what came next. Then a door opened behind her at the back of the shot, but it was blurry and hard to see what was happening. A figure stepped into the door frame, and it looked like a man wearing a mask. She flinched. He reached out to the side of the door frame and flicked off the light switch. For the next minute, it was nothing but darkness, but the audio kept rolling, like the guy didn't want to be seen or something. You could hear what sounded like the creak of the floor as he stepped forward, movement, a muffled male voice, and her whimpering and crying. And then she started screaming. Then the screen cut to black for the last time. The tape kept playing, but it was just static, like someone had deliberately recorded over what had happened next. I sat there in utter shock, stomach twisted, hands frozen on my lap. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just watched the last moments of someone's life. I locked up the store and took the tapes straight to the police, as well as the rest of the tapes from the collection, even though they just looked like regular movies. I thought they might be able to pull a fingerprint off them. And that was the last of my involvement with it. I never heard anything back from them, and they never came by to look through the store, nor made any request for further statements. The whole thing was unsettling and upsetting, and I cannot forget those images no matter how much time passes. I hope that it wasn't what I believed it to be, and that that woman is fine, living out her life somewhere. Or that they were able to find and bring to justice whoever filmed that tape. Since the internet came along, I've searched many times for information about this case and that woman, but I've found nothing. I've come to accept that I will probably live out the rest of my days never knowing what happened. I drive nights for a towing company. Sometimes I get called out to odd places, but honestly, for the most part, my job is pretty uneventful. I deal with a lot of angry people, so I have a pretty thick skin and not much gets to me, but the experience I'm about to share really shook me up. I got a call late one night from a company that owned an industrial lot on the edge of town. They said there was an abandoned car on the property that shouldn't be there and they wanted it removed. I'd been driving my tow truck all over this town for years, so I knew that area pretty well. The company wasn't physically operating there anymore, so nobody was actually on duty, but the lot wasn't completely deserted. There were a few motion-activated cameras still running to catch any trespassers. I think the cameras there essentially were just to detect movement and then relay that information to somebody else for review. There's a decent amount of crime in this area, so I get calls like this all the time. Anyway, I got the call and headed over. It took me probably 30 minutes to get there. I pulled up to the lot, and it was more or less what I expected. A mix of old warehouses and open space, and the car was parked near one of the rundown buildings. It was an older passenger car. The brown paint was faded, and the windows were a bit grimy. Other than that, everything looked normal at a first glance. No obvious dents or smashed glass or anything like that. But as I got closer, something caught my eye. The front seats were pushed all the way back, obscuring the back seats of the vehicle. It was a small detail, but in this line of work you see so many vehicles that you learn to notice anything out of place. I noted it as I hooked up the winch and started preparing the car for towing. As I was working, I couldn't help but feel for some reason that I needed to look in the back seat. I can't really explain it, I just couldn't get over how weird it looked to see the seat so far back like that. I stopped what I was doing, walked to the back of the car, and looked through the rear window. That's when I saw it. It looked exactly like there was a man lying in there, pressed flat under something dark. I couldn't be sure what it was at first, just that something was in there hidden among the worn upholstery and scattered items. I stepped around the side of the car, carefully pressing my face against the glass and shielding my eyes from the truck's headlights. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and at first I didn't see anything except the lump underneath what was either a coat or a blanket. Then, suddenly, the fabric pulled away. Beneath it was a man's face, his terrified eyes looking directly into mine. They were wide and fixed, like he'd been caught off guard. Suddenly, he sat straight up, so fast that it scared me and I stumbled backward. His reaction was so immediate and intense I didn't know how to react or what he might do next. I put up my hands, took another step back, and yelled out to him that I got a call to tow the car. He just stared at me with this crazed expression, the only sound my truck idling. Then, out of nowhere, there was this explosive flurry of movement. It was intense and I couldn't tell what he was doing. He started screaming like he was enraged. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but it was like watching somebody have a full-on meltdown. He was punching the seats and pulling his own hair and hopping up and down in the seat. Then he reached down, picked something up out of my line of sight, and a moment later, whatever it was hit the window with such force that it literally cracked the glass. I didn't have time to think. I just backed away, directly to my truck, got in, and reached for the radio. I radioed in that I had a situation at the lot and that there was a man in the back of the car who was potentially dangerous. I didn't wait for a reply as I turned back toward the vehicle. At that moment, the back door of the sedan swung open and the man got out. With one arm, he was holding a bunch of loose items against his chest, and in his other hand, I kid you not, was a handgun. He was screaming and pointing the gun directly at me. I lifted my hands and ducked down into the seat as much as I could, but I knew that if he really wanted to shoot me, there was not much I could do to stop him. Then, I heard him start kicking and smashing the front of the truck, knocking out one of the headlights. And then, as soon as it had started, it just stopped. When I lifted my head, I saw him running off into the darkness. I sat frozen for a moment, heart pounding, trying to decide what to do next. Then I picked up my radio and called in again, requesting police. Within 10 minutes or so, cop cars pulled into the lot. They questioned me, took my statement, and inspected the car. Later, one of the officers told me quietly that the car was linked to a home invasion earlier in the night. He explained that the owner had reported the incident shortly after midnight and that the suspect had been seen fleeing the scene. They believed that the car was used to stage a getaway or hide evidence for a crime that had just taken place. I was told to tow the car to an impound lot where the police would hold it for further investigation. I still can't shake the image of that man's eyes. I've been doing this job for over 20 years and I've seen my share of strange calls, but nothing like this. I still get chills when I think about how easily I could have been shot. I still tow cars and I still get calls in the dead of night, but I'll never let my guard down again. I always check twice and I never ignore even the slightest sense that something might be off. That night I got lucky, but I wonder what would have happened if I had just gone through with the tow without a second look, without even checking in the backseat at all. All I know is that I don't drive those roads without extra caution now, and I never forget the night when a simple job almost ended my life. Here's a story from my distant past, when my life was in a far bleaker place. I hope it can give a bit of context to what I'm about to share and some hope that things can change. I was at rock bottom back then. I'd been in and out of jail several times and was living on the streets. I lived in a horrible city that was totally run down, left behind, and dangerous. It goes without saying that I wasn't taking great care of myself back then, but for what it's worth, I am in a much better place now. At the time that this happened to me, there was an old hospital on the outskirts of town, which I had been sheltering in for a few weeks. I wasn't proud of it, but it kept me off the sidewalks when I had nothing else. Now I've turned things around and have a family and a better life, but I still remember that night like it was yesterday. It's one of those moments that changed everything, even if I never really want to look back at it. It was a major factor in me getting my life together. The hospital was far enough out of town that no one bothered checking it, and I kept to myself. I didn't break anything, didn't leave a mess, just needed a place to crash where no one would ask me questions and I could keep out of danger. At least that's what I thought it would be when I first started staying there. I spent my days scrounging together food and alcohol, and at night I'd disappear back into the building for rest. There was nobody else that I knew of using the building to shelter in. It was just me. As far as I knew, there was only one entrance that wasn't chained up. This loud door that always made a slamming sound, no matter how quietly you tried to close it. The area around the building was overgrown with tall grass. It almost had the appearance of a marsh. One night, when I got back, right away I noticed it smelled different. It was like decay, thick and awful. I couldn't get the smell out of my nose. I figured maybe an animal crawled in somewhere and died, but it seemed too sudden and intense for that. I sat down near my things, rolled some cigarettes and tried to ignore it, but it just kept hitting me in these waves, and at a certain point I could no longer pretend that this wasn't going to be a problem. I got up and started walking around. I went looking for where it was coming from, moving down the hall and checking old rooms. Then I got to the stairwell leading to the basement. The first time I had tried going down there, days before, the steps were blocked by junk, broken chairs, an old gurney, and random garbage. But someone had moved it all. There was a clear path now, like someone had made space to get through. And the smell was clearly coming from down there. I know now I should have left it alone. Instead, I pulled my shirt up over my face and started down the steps. It was dark down there, and all I had was my lighter, which despite what you see in movies is not a great source of light. But it's all I had, so I sparked it up and pressed on. The air was just awful, and it got worse the deeper I went. The basement level was cold, and most of the doors were busted or hanging off their hinges. But one door at the end of the hallway was padlocked shut. The door was barely intact, like the others, but it had been deliberately secured from the outside, and the lock looked recent. As fucked up as I was back at that point in my life, I still knew something was incredibly weird here. Why lock this door shut when everything else had been left to rot? I thought it was possible I was no longer the only person sheltering here, and perhaps this was where the other person was storing their things. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I knew that whatever was in there was the source of the smell. I stepped closer and something caught the corner of my eye. Fresh soil and drag marks in the dust leading right up to the door. That's when I knew for certain that someone had put something in there. I should have walked away, but I didn't make a lot of great decisions back then. I found a broken piece of pipe and wedged it under the weakest looking part of the latch. It took a few tries of me throwing my whole body weight against it in the pitch dark for the latch to finally snap and the door to creak open. I re-sparked my lighter. My shirt had fallen down from my face in the process of busting the latch, and as I opened the door, the smell hit me so hard I gagged. I held my lighter up, and the light flickered against a rolled-up tarp shoved against the back wall. Soil and dark stains covered the thing. I could not believe what I was looking at. I crouched down, pinched the edge of the tarp between my thumb and index finger, and pulled back just enough to see. There was a guy's fucking face under there. Pale, mouth slack, eyes open and glassy. And even more disturbing, he was decomposing. My brain stalled out. It was one thing to know what I was looking at, and a whole other thing to process it. Someone had dragged him down here not long ago. This was a drop spot, a temporary stash. He had clearly been buried elsewhere, dug up and moved. And that meant whoever put him here, they were coming back at some point. Then I heard it. The upstairs door slammed shut. Then, after a few beats of silence, footsteps coming down the stairs at the end of the hall. I barely had time to let off the gas of my lighter before I saw the glow of the flashlight sweeping through the hallway. I backed away from the tarp and out of the room, mind racing. There was only one way out, the stairs, the same way whoever was at the end of the hall had come in. I moved as quickly as I could, careful not to make sound, pressing myself into the shadows and slipping silently into one of the neighboring rooms. The footsteps got closer and then past the room I was in. Then I heard them stop. They were outside the room where the body had been stashed, and now they knew it had been opened. There was this long silence. And then, out of nowhere, whoever it was began a full sprint down the hallway back toward the staircase, up and out of the building. I once again heard the upstairs door open and slam shut. I did not waste any time. I ran down the hall in the dark, keeping low and sneaking up the stairs. I didn't know if this person was gone or coming back with more people or with a weapon or what the hell was going on. As I reached the door, I could hear a car's engine turn on outside and then the tires spinning out on the old pavement. I hit the door full force, shoving it open and sprinting into the night and toward the surrounding woods. I left everything there. I didn't even go back into town. I found a bus station and got the hell out. Didn't tell anyone what I saw, didn't want to know who I almost ran into that night. I'm not proud of that part of my life, and I'd like to think that I'm a different person now who would do something different in that same situation. But at the same time, I remember how desperate I was to stay out of jail and keep a low profile. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had been just a little slower, if that door didn't happen to slam shut every time it was closed and I hadn't seen them approaching me. Having gone through this and being where I am now, I can tell you that when you're living an average middle-class life, the darker side of human nature seems to only exist on TV or in movies. But when you're living like I was, I can tell you from personal experience, it's never more than a couple bad turns away from your reality. When I got out of the army, I moved into a new apartment. It was a poorer area, but a quiet neighborhood of mostly older folks. My next door neighbor was an elderly woman. She had to be in her late 70s, maybe older. Frail, slow-moving, but always smiling and super nice. I met her the first week I moved in, when I was unloading groceries from my car. She was struggling to carry a paper bag up her steps, so I offered to help. She thanked me like a dozen times and offered to pay me. I declined, but from then on, she'd always stop to chat when she saw me. Over time, I started helping her with little things, bringing in her mail, carrying heavy groceries, shoveling her walkway when it snowed. She'd mention her son sometimes, but always in passing and always vague. At first, I assumed he lived far away, maybe out of state, but the more we talked, the more I realized this wasn't the case. One time, she let it slip that he lived with her. He was just very busy, and that's why I hadn't met him yet. This seemed odd. The house was small, and I had never seen anyone coming or going besides her. No extra car in the driveway, no signs of another person living there. When I asked what he did for work, she got quiet and changed the subject. Then, one afternoon, I found her sitting on her front steps, crying. I asked her what was wrong, and she shook her head, saying it was nothing and that she was just tired. I pressed gently, and after a long pause, she told me that she was afraid of her son. I didn't know what to say. She looked at me like she immediately regretted telling me. I asked if she was okay, if she needed help, if I should call someone. She wiped her eyes, forced a smile, and told me everything was fine. That was the end of the conversation. I didn't push, but it pissed me off and I started paying more attention. The next few days, I barely saw her. Her blinds were always shut. I even stopped by to bring in the mail, but when I knocked, she either didn't answer or said she wasn't feeling well and asked me to just leave it on the porch. Then, one night, I noticed something strange. I stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. Her living room window was slightly open, blinds parted just enough to see inside. I wasn't trying to pry, but I caught a glimpse of movement, someone walking past the window just for a second. It was quick, but I could have sworn I saw an elderly woman in a bathrobe, only it didn't look quite right. The way they moved, the shape of their shoulders, it didn't match hers. I stared for a moment, then the figure turned back toward the window and I saw them more clearly. It wasn't her, it was a man, wearing a wig and her bathrobe. I froze, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Before I could react, the figure disappeared deeper into the house. I walked up to her door and knocked. Nobody answered. I knocked again, harder this time. After a long pause, the door opened slightly. A man stood there in the dim light, mid-40s, unshaven, and haggard. He looked nothing like the figure I'd just seen, but something felt off. His posture was tense, like he was hiding something behind the door. In this flat, dismissive way, he asked me if I needed something. I tried to sound casual and told him that I was just checking in on my neighbor because I hadn't seen her in a few days. He then told me she was sleeping. I asked if he was her son and if she was okay. He said yes and told me she was fine. I glanced past him. Something pink was balled up on the floor behind him. The bathrobe. The same one I had seen through the window. Then I heard something. A faint, muffled noise from inside the house, like a whimper. He started to tell me to have a good night and close the door, but before he could finish, the sound came again. It was my neighbor and she was calling out for help. This basically threw me into a blind rage. I shoved the door open. He tried to block me, but I pushed past him. The house was dim, the air thick with a foul, stale smell. I rushed down the hall toward the sound, turned the corner, and saw her. She was sitting on a wooden chair in the middle of a bedroom. Her hands were tied to the armrests. Her long, gray hair had been sloppily cut short. Her lips were smeared with red lipstick and her cheeks caked with powder. She was dressed in a button-down shirt and slacks, clothes that were far too big for her. She had been dressed up like a man. At the same moment I was processing all of this, from the side, her son lunged at me and tried to tackle me, but I was able to spin out of it. He was wearing her robe again and a fucking wig. He tried grabbing at me, and I guess he must have had long fingernails or something because he actually got a couple good scratches on me. I laid into him a couple times before I was able to get out of the house and call 911. The police arrived fast. They dragged him out, kicking and sobbing. She was taken to the hospital. I later learned she'd been abused for years, mentally and physically. I guess the guy had serious issues, but she cared too much about him to put him away somewhere, or she couldn't afford it, I don't know. The things he did to her, the way he controlled her, it was beyond anything I thought was actually real life. The dressing up, the role reversals, it was part of some twisted psychological torment he inflicted on her. She survived and was moved to a care facility somewhere safe, while her son was charged with a list of offenses. Last I heard, he was ruled mentally unfit to stand trial. I used to visit her, but I think it started to bring back a lot of bad memories for her, so I stopped going. I still think of her a lot. The way she smiled, how she always thanked me for the smallest kindness, and I wonder how many times she wanted to tell me the truth. I just wish I had noticed sooner. Maybe she wouldn't have spent all those years living in fear of her own son. About 8 years ago, I moved into a new house. I had taken a job in a different state and ended up with something a little more rural than I was used to. It was a pretty modest place, set back from the road, pretty, isolated, with empty fields and tree lines surrounding it. The quiet was pretty jarring at first, but I told myself I'd get used to it. My nearest neighbor, who I hadn't met yet, was a mile down the road, a fact that both felt peaceful and unsettling. 3 days after I moved in, there was a knock at the door just as the sun was going down. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened up, a man stood there, mid-50s, a bit weathered, but with a friendly smile. He introduced himself, said he lived down the road, and just wanted to welcome me to the area. We made small talk for a few minutes. He asked what brought me out here and told me a little bit about the town. He was polite, but I couldn't help notice there was something odd about him. Something about the way that he watched me, like he was trying too hard to seem normal. It was just weird. I chalked it up to my own nerves, made an excuse about needing to unpack, and sent him on his way. Early the next evening, around the same time, I opened the door to go outside and retrieve something from my car. I hadn't taken more than one step onto the porch when I saw someone walking up my driveway. It was my neighbor again, holding a pie this time. He was dressed in the exact same outfit as the day before and looked like he hadn't showered. I don't say this to make it sound like I was judging him for it, but I couldn't help but notice it. At the same time, it's not like you really need to impress anybody out here, so I just kind of brushed it off. He got to the edge of the porch and told me he had made a pie, holding it up. I didn't really know what to say. I couldn't have this guy just showing up to my house unannounced all the time, but I didn't want to be rude. I thanked him and offered for him to come in and share the pie with me, feeling like I didn't have much of a choice. We sat in my barely furnished kitchen, eating pie off paper plates. The pie was good, but totally cold, which was a little confusing because he made it seem like he had brought it right over. The conversation was a little stiff, mostly driven by him. His questions all felt strangely personal. Did I live alone? Did my family visit often? Did I lock my doors at night? Then he started to go on and on about his own family, and how his house was just like mine and how he loved what I had done with the place. This was particularly weird because I hadn't done anything with the place. I'd barely moved in. This is when it started to feel uncomfortable. I was trying to figure out an excuse to cut things short when he got up to use the bathroom. As he closed the bathroom door, I noticed something. A small sticker on the bottom of the pie tin. I lifted the plate and felt my stomach drop. There was a label on it from the grocery store in town. He hadn't made it. I wasn't sure why this set me off, but it did. When he came back, I tried to make a joke out of it. I told him that he made the pie so well, it looked like the grocery store wanted to hire him in the bakery department, and I held up the pie tin, revealing the label. I meant this to be lighthearted, but his face went blank, completely blank. I was about to tell him I was just teasing him when he looked me dead in the eye and said that I was the rudest guest he'd ever had over for dessert and that I wouldn't be invited back. I had no idea what was going on. I thought maybe he was joking in response to my joke, so I laughed. Then he started laughing. A sharp, high-pitched laugh that didn't sound right coming out of a grown man. He clutched his stomach and bent over like he'd just told the funniest joke in the world. Then, without warning, he let out this weird, sharp scream. It sounded like an animal, like a deer or something. Before I could react, he bolted past me, knocking over his chair and the little folding table we'd been sitting at. He ran down the hall and up the stairs deeper into my house. I could hear him stomping around on the second floor, opening and slamming doors, calling out names and telling people that weren't there to come out from wherever they were hiding. I backed out of the kitchen, grabbed my phone, and ran outside. I called the police from my driveway, keeping my eyes locked on the house. I half expected to see him burst through a window or come charging out the front door, but the house was silent now. It took the cops like a full 15 minutes to get there. The 2 deputies went inside while another one stayed with me. I told them what had happened, feeling ridiculous as I described how a lie about a pie had sent the guy into a frenzy. After a few minutes, one of the deputies came back outside, his face unreadable. He confirmed with me that I had said this man was my neighbor and lived down the road. I told him yes. He exchanged a look with his partner and then told me that this man hadn't lived anywhere near here for years. They led me inside. The guy was in the upstairs bedroom, lying on the floor, curled on his side like he was sleeping. He was mumbling something and rocking slightly. They cuffed him and let him out without a struggle. I asked them what the hell was going on. One of the deputies sighed and looked around the room. She explained that they knew who he was, that this was the house he used to live in, that his wife and kids left him and he couldn't keep up with the mortgage, and that everything sort of fell apart for him. He had ended up homeless, living in a shelter. I felt terrible and horrified at the same time. They explained that he had mental health issues and clearly couldn't let go. What they couldn't explain is how he had gotten out here from town without a vehicle. He must have walked all that way carrying the pie. Additionally, they said that there had been calls to this address from the previous homeowner about suspected break-ins and that they now believed it was possible he was responsible. The guy didn't fight back when they put him in the squad car. He just sat there staring at the house like he was trying to memorize every inch of it. I watched as they all drove away. I never found out what happened to him after that. Maybe they took him to a hospital, maybe he had family somewhere, but I never saw him again. That night, I locked every door and every window. I closed all the blinds and turned on every light. Then I just sat in the living room, wide awake, listening to the silence, wondering how many nights that guy had stood outside, looking in, waiting to come back home. The story I'm about to tell took place in a neighborhood I'd been living in for a while. It was a sparse little group of houses at the edge of town, just woods behind me. I liked the quiet. I liked knowing I was left alone. There had never been any issues. Then out of nowhere, things started feeling off. I'd come home from work and the back gate would be unlatched, or there'd be this faint cigarette smell lingering near the fence. I had one of those old floodlights with a motion sensor, bright enough to cut across the lawn and into the tree line. It started going off at random times at night. I'd be sitting in my living room, and suddenly the yard would light up like a prison break. The first couple times, I ignored it, figuring it was maybe an animal or something. But then it started happening every night. I tried cleaning and adjusting the sensor, thinking that something might be malfunctioning. But there was no change. Sometimes it would flick on and off, like something was pacing just out of proximity. Other times it would stay on for long stretches, like something or someone might be out there, standing, just watching the house. It started to feel like someone was testing the boundaries, probing the sensor to understand its behavior and exactly how far away they needed to be in order to remain undetected. One night, I stayed up with the lights off, watching. At some point after midnight, the floodlight snapped on. I had had enough. I grabbed my flashlight and ran out the back door, standing on the back porch and beaming it into the tree line. There was a figure standing there. I couldn't make out much, just that it was a person. I didn't know what to say, so I just yelled out that they needed to leave. There was a long, awkward silence, then the figure just turned around and walked deeper into the woods and out of sight. I was deeply unsettled. I went back inside, locked the door, and just sat there thinking. The rest of the night was uneventful, but I know now I should have called the police. The next several nights went by without incident. But then one night, as I was laying in bed unable to fall asleep, maybe 4 or 5 days after the encounter, the floodlight snapped on. I sat up in bed, but before I could make a decision to get up and go back outside, there was a smashing sound from the side of the house and the floodlight went out. A few seconds of silence passed. Then, from the back of the house, a deep scraping sound. It was the sound of metal on wood, slow and deliberate. Then a thud, then another. Someone was trying to pry open my back door. My body moved before my brain caught up. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the front door for the car. As soon as I hit the driveway, I heard it. Footsteps breaking into a run behind me around the side of the house. I jumped in, slammed the door, locked it, and got out of there, throwing up gravel as I peeled out. In the rearview mirror, I could see flashlights moving through the first floor of my house. I parked in a store lot and called the cops, who got there as quick as they could. The house was empty. The back door frame was destroyed and splintered, like someone had forced it open with a pry bar. A few feet away, they found footprints in the dirt, at least 2 different sets. Inside, things were even weirder. The drawers in my bedroom were pulled out and dumped on the floor. The attic hatch was hanging open with the ladder extended down. The cops did a sweep but otherwise found nothing. Whoever it was gone. But here's the part that still gets me. Behind one of the bookshelves in my office, there was a hidden compartment. I had no idea it was there. It was left open and empty. I don't know what was in there or who could have possibly known it was there. I'd been living in that house for probably 3 years at that point and had no idea it was there. The only other info the police had was that the previous owner was some old guy who died in a nursing home. No family, no record of anything valuable being left behind. So what the hell were they looking for? And worse, did they find it? I stayed with a friend that night, too shaken to go back. I lived there for another year after that and nothing weird happened again. But every night I slept with my bedroom door locked and a bat within reach. I still don't know what was hidden in that house, and I sure as hell don't want to know what would have happened if I'd been inside when they found it. I was driving home one night. I don't remember the exact time, but it was late. I live in a more rural area, and I was coming home from an out-of-state day trip to a friend's wedding. Where I live, once you're off the highway, it's basically all rural roads where you don't see another car for miles. Things get even more remote when you take all the dirt road crosscuts that I do. Definitely no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the dark. I wasn't in a rush necessarily. I enjoyed driving, but it had been a long day and I was eager to get back. Even still, it felt a bit weird. There's something about being that alone, out there in the middle of nowhere, that makes you feel hyper aware of everything. Then I saw her. At first I thought it was an animal, just a shape in the road, but as I got closer I realized it was a person. A woman, kneeling on my side of the dirt road. She was rocking back and forth with her hands gripping her head. Again, just to remind you of the context, we are in the middle of absolutely nowhere. I was immediately concerned. This was obviously bad no matter what the situation was. Either she was hurt or something was very, very wrong. I slowed down but didn't stop right away. I know stopping for strangers on an empty road at night wasn't exactly smart. But as I got a better look at her in the headlights, I couldn't help but feel like I needed to stop. She looked destroyed. Her clothes were filthy and torn like she'd been crawling through the mud. Her hair was wet and matted, and her feet were bare and covered in scratches. As my headlights passed over her, she put her hands up as if to say, "Don't hurt me, I give up." This was extremely unsettling. I initially drove past her, looking on either side of the road for other people. I've heard too many horror stories of traps or setups where people are baited into life-threatening situations by their sympathies. But I saw nothing, so less than a quarter of a mile later, I turned around and went back. She was still there, collapsed in the road in the same place. But as my headlights got closer to her, she appeared to attempt to crawl back into the woods, dragging herself, or attempting to, by her arms. I pulled up beside her and cracked my window just enough to be heard and asked her if she was okay. She turned toward me, and I'll never forget the way her face looked. She was crying, but there was no sound, just these big, panicked gasps. She looked absolutely terrified. She choked out these broken statements, begging for help and not to let him take her back. That was it. There was no more hesitation. I threw my car into park and got out. I told her we'd get her somewhere safe, keeping my voice calm. I was trying to split my attention between her and listening for the slightest change in the environment around us. She struggled to her feet, and I could see her legs shaking. She had also wet herself and could barely hold herself up. She reached out, grabbing onto my arm like it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Up close, she smelled like stagnant water, urine, and dirt, like she had dragged herself through a creek bed. I opened the passenger door and helped her in, telling her she was safe and that I would take her to the hospital. I honestly wasn't sure what to make of the situation, whether she was in genuine danger or having some kind of breakdown or something, but I figured the hospital would be the best option regardless. Then I saw the headlights. Another car was coming up behind us. My gut immediately told me this wasn't just some random driver. The timing was too perfect. I shut the passenger door and walked around to the driver's side, trying to act normal. The car rolled to a stop a few yards away, and even before the driver stepped out, I noticed there were no license plates. The man who got out was clean-cut, maybe mid-40s, and dressed like someone who worked a regular job. He looked normal. He wasn't upset, but there was an air of frustration about him. He finally spoke and said good evening and thanked me for finding his wife. The woman in my car let out a stifled cry. I didn't look at her. I didn't want to give away that I knew she was terrified. The man continued that she'd been off her meds. She'd wandered off from their property and that he'd been looking for her for hours. He told me that he appreciated me stopping, but that he could handle it from here. Everything in me was screaming that this wasn't right. I kept my face neutral and told him that I'd still like to take her to the hospital, keeping my voice as even as I could. The guy sighed like he was annoyed, shaking his head. He told me that he understood my concern and that I was trying to help, but that she was his responsibility and I didn't need to make this a bigger deal than it was. That this was a common occurrence, unfortunately. Inside the car, I could hear the woman talking to herself in this pleading tone. She was terrified of him. I told the guy that I understood and appreciated everything he was saying, but that I would feel most comfortable bringing her to the hospital myself, and that if he wanted to reunite with her there, that made the most sense to me. Then there was a silence between us. His whole body seemed super tense, like he was considering his next move. I didn't give him the chance. I yanked my door open and threw myself inside, slamming the locks down. Before he could react, I had the car in reverse. He took a step forward, but I gunned it backwards, spinning the car around. Then I floored it. In the mirror, I saw him just standing there, watching. But then, I saw his headlights start moving. He was following us. The woman was curled up in the passenger seat, whispering over and over, telling me not to stop. For miles, the guy stayed behind us, never too close, never trying to run me off the road or anything, just following. Then, just as we got close to town, close to the glow of the hospital sign, he turned. Just like that, no hesitation, he veered off onto some side road and disappeared. At the hospital, the staff called the police. I stayed with her until they took her into emergency care. She was shaking and barely able to walk. When the police arrived, I told them everything I could. A week later, they called me back to give another statement, and I asked them what had happened. They wouldn't tell me anything, just thanked me for my time. I never heard another word about it, and I'll never know if that man ever found her again. I had been out hiking that day, just a solo trek to clear my head. I wasn't from the area, but I knew the trails well enough. I was just getting back to my car when I saw the cluster of emergency vehicles in the parking lot. A woman was crying, clutching onto a man who was trying to keep it together, and there were officers and search and rescue volunteers moving around quickly. I overheard enough to put it together. A little girl had gone missing on the trail. 6 years old. She had been walking behind her parents one minute and gone the next. No sound, no struggle, just gone. They were asking for volunteers, anyone who knew the trails. I stepped up. It wasn't even a decision, just something I did instinctively. I was handed a flashlight and given a section of woods to cover, along with a handful of others. They described the girl and what she was wearing. They told us to stay within earshot, call out her name, and look for anything that could be connected. We had maybe an hour of daylight left. I don't know how long I was out there before I saw the shoe. Small, pink, half buried in leaves. I started to get this morbid sense of panic in my gut. I called out her name, but my voice just got swallowed up by the trees. I hadn't even realized how far away from everyone else I had gotten. I looked around and saw faint indentations in the dirt, a set of adult footprints, and then another set of smaller ones. I stepped deeper off the main trail, moving carefully. I didn't know what I was going to find next, if anything. I followed this little path, deeper and quieter, until I reached a sort of clearing. Not a meadow, just a break in the dense tree cover. She was there. She was just sitting there on a rock, her face smudged with dirt, her clothes stained. She wasn't crying, wasn't calling for help. She just stared at me with wide, blank eyes. I crouched down, kept my voice soft, told her I was here to help and that we needed to go back to her parents. She shook her head and told me she wasn't supposed to talk to anyone. I told her she was okay and that her parents had asked me to look for her. She hesitated and then whispered to me that, quote, "He said to wait here and be good." I froze. Then she said he told her not to move and that he'd come back. It felt like all the blood in my body went cold in an instant. I glanced around, scanning the tree line. I saw nothing but stillness, but that didn't mean we were alone. She reached for me and I scooped her up, ready to bolt back to the trail. Then, footsteps. Behind us, close. I turned my head and saw a man standing between the trees. He didn't move, didn't speak. He was just watching. My entire body locked up. I couldn't see his face, just his outline. He looked like a statue standing in the middle of the woods. This dude was huge. It was clear he hadn't expected to see me. Then I ran. I expected to hear him barreling after us, crashing through the undergrowth, but there was nothing. My legs started to burn, but I didn't stop, not until I saw the glow of flashlight beams ahead. I burst out of the trees, gasping and shouting. The others ran toward me, and I nearly collapsed as they took the girl from my arms. Someone was radioing in, others swarming, but all I could think to do was turn back toward the trees, expecting to see him standing there. But there was no one. I immediately got the police involved, but I couldn't tell them much. I hadn't seen the guy's face, I hadn't even heard him speak. They searched the area, but found nothing. The girl was safe, she was back with her parents, and that's what mattered. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew, somewhere out there, that the man that tried to take her was still watching. I didn't remember what happened at first, just waking up in the hospital. I was in a ton of pain and couldn't figure out exactly where it was coming from. There were tubes in my arms, beeping machines, and that sterile hospital smell. I didn't even know how long I'd been there, or why I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. A nurse came in when she saw me stirring and asked how I was feeling. My head was a mess. I think I must have been on a lot of drugs. I don't remember what I said, but it was probably totally incoherent. She brought me in a light snack and some juice, and I eventually fell back asleep. When I woke up again, a different nurse was saying my name. She explained something along the lines of there being a couple police officers who wanted to speak with me. One of them was older, looked tired. The other one was younger, maybe mid-30s. He had this weird look on his face, like he didn't know how to talk to me. They asked me what I remembered. I told them I remembered nothing, which was the truth. I didn't get the impression that I'd been in the hospital for very long, but I had no idea how I got there, and I certainly didn't understand why police would be involved in the conversation. Then, the older one blew my mind. He told me that I'd been attacked, and that they thought it was a case of mistaken identity. That took me a long minute to sink in, and even then, I didn't really understand what he was talking about. They went on to explain that I wasn't the person my attackers meant to go after, or at least that was the running theory. Apparently, I looked a lot like some other guy, a guy with gang connections. I have a lot of tattoos and don't look like your average office worker, but I've never been involved in anything criminal in my life and certainly have no connections to anything gang-related. Evidently, somebody or some people thought that I was this other person, so they beat the hell out of me and left me for dead. If some passerby hadn't spotted me in the parking lot where they left me, I wouldn't have even made it to the hospital alive. They had a few leads, they said, a couple of names. They were hoping my memory would come back so I could help them identify who it was. But the way they looked at me, I could tell they were holding something back. That's when they showed me the article. I was in the news. Man brutally attacked, found barely alive. The thing that got me, though, was what the cops told me next. Because of the news article, it was possible that whoever had done this to me was now aware that I had survived and could possibly identify them. I just stared at the article on his phone screen. I still couldn't remember anything, but now I wasn't sure if I even wanted to. I spent the next couple days in that hospital bed, barely moving. The pain meds kept me in and out, but every time I dozed off, I'd wake up in a panic. I kept thinking about that article, about what the cops said. If these people thought I was dead, then found out I wasn't, what were they gonna do about it? The third night, I was laying there, half asleep, when I heard voices outside my room. Someone was speaking to a nurse, a woman. She said something about being someone's sister. By the sound and proximity of it, I assumed she was talking about me. I went totally still. I don't have a sister. I'm an only child, and both parents had passed away at that point in my life. I don't know who exactly she was talking to out there, but she told them that she wanted to see me and make sure I was okay. I couldn't see either of them, only hear them outside the door to my room. I was also high as hell on pain meds and was having a hard time really absorbing the reality of the situation. The nurse told her she'd have to check visitor records first. The woman didn't push it, said of course, and that she had no problem just waiting. I was trying not to freak out, trying to breathe slow and stay calm, but that voice was familiar. Then it hit me. It was the last thing I remembered before waking up in the hospital bed. I wanted to call out to the nurse, but I just laid there, barely breathing, listening. I didn't hear anything else after that. Maybe she left, maybe she didn't. No nurse, no woman, nothing. I didn't know what was happening. Maybe 20 minutes went by. It honestly could have been an hour, my sense of time was so messed up. But then, I heard a creak. I couldn't turn my head to see, could barely move at all, so I called out to see if it was a nurse, but there was no reply. Then, I heard footsteps, soft and coming closer. There was a rustling sound, like fabric or a pillow shifting. Then, I was plunged into total darkness and something was covering my face, making it hard to breathe. At first, it was soft, almost careful, but then it got heavier,
harder, like someone was putting all their weight on my head. I could not breathe at all at this point. I couldn't fight, couldn't push back. My body wasn't working. I struggled, barely able to move. Then, by the grace of God, loud, shrill alarms. The machines I was hooked up to were losing it. My heart rate must have spiked. Something must have triggered them. The pressure lifted, footsteps scuffled away. Then I heard the door fly open and people started screaming and yelling. It was a chaotic outburst of multiple people yelling, hollering, and scuffling. I couldn't see much. My vision was all messed up, but I heard the commotion. Heard someone trying to make excuses. The same woman I had heard outside the door to my room. She told them she was just checking on me, saying she thought that I needed help. They weren't buying it. Security grabbed her and the police were called. Turns out they had already had her on the suspect list. I still don't remember everything about the attack. Maybe I never will. But I know this, I wasn't supposed to survive that night in the parking lot. And I definitely wasn't supposed to survive the hospital. But somehow, I did. Back in the late 90s, before all the gadgets, gizmos, and devices we have now, I was working up at a communications outpost in the Cascades. I absolutely loved it, but you really needed to be the type of person who didn't mind being alone. The place wasn't manned most of the year, but some of the dated analog equipment required regular maintenance during the storm season. They rotated guys through, 1 week on, 1 week off. You did your checks, your reports, and then the rest of the time you just sit, read, eat, stare out at the trees. You stayed at a tiny cabin with a diesel generator. No roads once the snow hit, just a snowmobile for emergencies. The nearest contact, to my knowledge, was about 12 miles away. I'd done 3 rotations before, and I knew the place pretty well. That's why the smoke caught my attention. I spotted it the second day of my shift, curling up from a ridge about a mile southeast. Too small to be a forest fire, but large enough that I took notice. The whole area is restricted land, so I radioed it in, but nobody acted like it was urgent. The assumption was it was probably some dumb hiker breaking the rules, so I let it slide. But it kept happening. Every afternoon for 3 days straight, I saw smoke rising up from the same spot, always in the afternoon, always gone by nightfall. By day 4, I decided to check it out for myself. Not protocol, I know, but the weather was calm and it was getting to the point where someone needed to intervene and let this person know that what they were doing wasn't safe. The area was patchy with snow, and even in the wintertime, dry wood can be extremely hazardous. If it was one single fire, one time, I get it, but doing this multiple days in a row was asking for trouble, and I wasn't about to let some idiot start a fire up there. I took the snowmobile down as far as I could and hiked the rest of the way in. When I reached the ridge, the smoke was already gone, just charred ground and a circle of stones where the fire had been. There were signs of a makeshift camp, tarp scraps, food wrappers, old clothes. Nothing was fresh, but the place didn't feel empty. There was this smell, not rot exactly, but metallic and sharp. The whole place felt off, like whoever had been there had left in a hurry. I stomped out the coals and made sure the fire was completely dead, then took a stick and scratched into the soil around the fire pit a message: "No fires, dangerous." I hiked back to the snowmobile in silence. The whole way it felt like I was being watched. The rest of the afternoon was normal. I did some cleaning up around the cabin and some maintenance on the snowmobile before turning in for the evening. I don't know what time it was, but at some point in the middle of the night, something woke me up. A single knock on the door. At first, I couldn't be sure if I had dreamed it or not. I considered getting out of bed and checking outside just to be careful, but there was no further sound, so I convinced myself I was dreaming and rolled over to go back to bed. Then, another knock. I sat up and grabbed the emergency flashlight from the nightstand. I crept to the front window and peeked through the curtain. Nothing. Just moonlight on the snow. Then, from behind the cabin, footsteps. I silently moved to the back window and looked out, but couldn't see anything. The footsteps continued to circle around, and then a crack, right against the back wall, like it had been hit with a tree branch or baseball bat or something. I immediately shouted that I was armed, which was met with total silence. Then came the tapping. It moved from the back wall to the side of the cabin and then around to the front, like someone was tracing the perimeter with a finger. And then the first window shattered. Glass sprayed across the floor. I dropped low with my back to a wall. Then another window shattered. Something hit the side of the cabin with a loud crash. I saw a rock bounce across the floor. A big rock. Then another. Whoever was out there was throwing them inside as hard as they could. And just like that, the chaos stopped. I stayed crouched behind the table for what felt like an hour. Finally, I heard crunching footsteps receding into the woods. I didn't sleep, just waited for sunrise. When I finally went outside, I found the front of the cabin peppered with rocks. All the windows were smashed in. No footprints except my own and one other set, large, heavy boots. They circled the cabin twice. And then I saw it. In front of the cabin, scratched into the dirt, it said, "Wrong. I am dangerous." I hiked out early, leaving my shift 2 days ahead of schedule, but I refused to stay out there any longer for that trip. Then I filed a report and made sure the company knew exactly what the situation was out there. They sent a ranger out with a couple guys to repair the windows. Evidently, they didn't see any indication of someone else being in the area. A month later, I heard from the guy who took over the rotation after the cabin had been repaired. He said he had seen smoke from a nearby ridge during his stay. And that was the last I heard about it. I do post-eviction cleanouts, private contractor. Usually it's just food rotting in a fridge, bags of trash, stuff left behind by people who couldn't or wouldn't move it all out. The only information I received about this gig was that it was a hoarder situation. Third floor unit, and the tenant had been evicted days earlier. The building manager said it had taken legal action to get the guy out of there, and he had to be forcibly removed. I was to just go in, clear it out, and get the keys back to him by the weekend. It's definitely not a job for the squeamish. I've seen some of the nastiest stuff in my life on these jobs. Each one feels like a crime scene, and you get a real window into the mind of the person who was living there in the days before they left, or in some cases, passed away. I headed over to the place directly from a job earlier that had taken me all day. My plan was to bang it out overnight and into the morning so I could take the weekend off. When I got there, the smell hit me before I even opened the door. Inside, it was wall-to-wall filth. Stacks of newspapers, junk mail, cracked Tupperware containers, some empty, some not-so-empty food cans, paper plates and plastic utensils piled all around, and then tons of old clothes. It was like someone had been living in a tank for years. But what stuck out to me off the rip was the theme. All the non-food clutter was child-related. Broken toys, faded baby blankets, old car seats and strollers, cribs with mold-stained mattresses, and children's clothes. It didn't look like a child had lived there. It looked like someone had been collecting things that a child would use. No photos on the fridge, no drawings on the walls, just a disturbing amount of kid stuff, like it was curated. I started clearing space in the deepest part of the apartment, furthest from the front door, with the intention of working my way backwards toward the entrance. In the back room, buried under some clothing and children's books, behind a medium-sized dresser full of random junk, I found a stack of cardboard shoeboxes duct taped shut. I can't really explain why, but something about the location of them, tucked behind this dresser and buried under a bunch of other stuff, felt like they had been deliberately placed there, like they were intended to be hidden. The dresser was extremely heavy, just packed with random crap. I tipped it over and pushed it out of the way. As I did, one of the legs caught the stack of shoeboxes, and the top box slipped off, falling onto the corner of the dresser. The lid popped off, and the contents spilled out all over. Inside were photographs. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Most of them loose, some of them bundled with rubber bands. I pulled one out. It was a photo of a little boy, maybe 6 or 7, wearing a rainbow-colored jacket, walking into what looked like a schoolyard. The photo was taken from a distance with a zoom lens. Next photo, another boy. Different location, same style, far away, clearly candid, not posed. I kept flipping through them. All kids, all taken in public from behind or from across the street. None of them seemed to know they were being photographed. I had this terrible feeling about what I had found and didn't know how to process it. I wasn't sure what I should do next or if I should even continue cleaning, so I backed away and called my boss. I told him something wasn't right and that I needed him to come take a look. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. For about the next 10 minutes, I went through the rest of the room with a light touch, leaving the area around the photos undisturbed. It was the bedroom, and I was trying to shift the stained mattress off the box spring when I heard the front door open and then shut. I hadn't locked it behind me. I assumed it was my boss, and he had gotten there earlier than expected. I yelled out his name and that I was in the back bedroom. There was no response. I called out his name again, and still nothing. Then I heard someone moving through the river of junk in the hallway. Before I had a chance to leave the bedroom, a shadow spilled across the floor in front of the doorway, followed by a man who turned the corner and just stood there, blocking the exit. Mid-50s, unshaven, rail thin. The man said nothing. Then his eyes dropped to the floor, where the spilled box of photos sat. His face changed. I apologized and told him I was the cleanup crew and that I was just here to clear the place out. He didn't answer, he just stared down at the photos. Then he stepped inside and started trying to shut the bedroom door, closing us both in. It was this rush of movement, but he couldn't get the door to shut because it was blocked by so much crap on the ground. I backed away, telling him I could just go and come back later and that there was no problem. But he was raging, throwing his whole body weight into trying to close the door. He was just yanking on the door with all of his strength. I mean, like if somebody was fighting for their life level of intensity, over and over and over. The wood of the door wasn't breaking, but it was making this cracking sound and starting to bend on the top half where he was pulling on it. Behind me there were 2 small windows, one barred. Through the other, I could see the fire escape. I backed up to it, stumbling over junk, threw it open, and climbed out. The dude heard me doing this and started stumbling toward the window, slamming it shut behind me as I started down the ladder. Halfway down, something caught my leg, and I slipped and fell the last 6 feet, hitting the dumpster that was there and slicing open my arm. I scrambled out, bleeding, and ran to my van. I immediately called my boss again, who was like 5 minutes away at that point, told him to forget coming over and just to call the cops. I ended up going to the ER right away to get stitches. He texted me saying that the guy was gone when the police arrived. No sign of him, no shoeboxes, no photos. I have no idea what happened to that guy, if the cops found him or the photos, or if he just disappeared. I still think about the look on that guy's face though when he turned the corner, and all those kids. I know what I saw, and I know what that apartment really was. It wasn't a home, it was a collection. I had some trouble early on in my life, a difficult family situation, then later as a young adult caught a couple charges and ended up in a halfway house. Nothing major, but it was enough to make it difficult to find a job. I eventually found some work outside San Antonio as a cemetery groundskeeper. I've been here for almost 8 years now. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work and quiet, which is more than I can say for most jobs I've had. I mostly keep the lawn cut and do minor repairs, that sort of thing, but I have a story for you from early on in my time here. This was when I had just started working here. They'd been doing renovations and needed some extra hands. They were moving some of the older graves from the 1800s and early 1900s to a smaller plot across the property. I took it seriously. I had had other jobs at like liquor stores and bottle redemption centers, but this was my first kind of steady gig and I didn't want to lose it. It was pretty sensitive work. Some families still visited those graves, others hadn't been touched in decades. My job was mostly hauling crates and helping the guys from the city do the transfer. But after a couple weeks, something started bugging me. The crates got weirdly light. When I first started, I'd handled enough of them to know that something was off. It wasn't every single one, but certainly enough that it started to become noticeable. I had even helped with an exhumation there, and knew that unless it was a very rare situation, that there should have been more in the containers. Maybe one that was too light you could kind of overlook, but not a bunch of them. So I started checking the containers. Not to get too graphic, but the remains weren't complete. Sometimes the skull would be gone. Other times it was the long bones, the femurs or arms, even the ribs. At first I thought maybe it was natural because I didn't know better. Things decay. Maybe we just didn't see everything. But after the third or fourth time I started keeping track. I made a list of the crate numbers and what was missing. Then came the one that did it. It was a child's grave. The headstone had worn down to almost nothing, but the date was still visible. The casket inside was small, and when we opened it, there was almost nothing left. A partial spine and one arm bone. That was it. Not even a skull. I brought it up to the guy who essentially ran the place, the guy who had hired me. He was quiet, probably 10 years older than me, and kept to himself. He just sort of shrugged it off like it wasn't that big a deal. He basically said that these remains were so old that it didn't really matter. Any relatives they had were all dead, and it's not like anybody would notice. I didn't push it, but I thought it was a weird response. Like, who treats human remains like that? If those were my relatives' bones and some had just randomly gone missing, I'd be pissed that this guy seemed to not give a shit. I'd at the very least want an explanation. I was new and didn't want to ruffle any feathers at that point in my life, so I just nodded along. But from then on, I started watching him closer. One night, I stayed late. I had some experience as a builder and planned to repair the little barn where we kept the yard equipment in. It had been damaged in a storm earlier in the week. The barn was near a far end of the plot, near a locked storage container that I had never been inside. None of the other guys I worked with had been inside it either. Nobody knew what was inside. Aside from retrieving the occasional piece of yard equipment, there was essentially no other reason to spend time over in that area. I parked around the back of the barn, got to work, and before I knew it, it got late. I was wrapping up and getting ready to split when that same guy I had spoken to about the remains showed up. I recognized his truck immediately. This is at like almost 9 at night at a cemetery. Literally no reason for him to be there. At first I thought he might be heading over to the little office area because he forgot something. But no, he drove almost directly toward me, stopping outside the storage container. He didn't see me, and I, for whatever reason, decided to not make myself known. I then watched him get out of his truck, walk over to the storage container, and unlock it. He then came back out with a cooler, which he loaded into his truck. Then he relocked the storage container, got in his truck, and drove out. I was perplexed and decided I would follow him. I kept my headlights off initially so he didn't see me pull out of the cemetery, and continued to follow him, not close enough to get spotted, but just enough to keep his taillights in view. He drove about 20 minutes out to a strip of additional storage units off a side road near the county line. I parked down the street and walked up on foot. I waited until he was inside the unit, then crept around the side. The door to the unit opened and closed vertically like a garage door, and he had left the bottom quarter of it open behind him. I bent down and looked under. The place was a workshop. He had a table set up with tools, brushes, bleach, gloves. Bones were laid out on towels. Some were labeled, some were wrapped in foam. There were plastic containers on the shelves labeled with dates. Some said adult, others said infant. One corner had cleaned skulls, posed like a fucking museum display. And worst of all, there was a clear tub in the corner. Inside were small, child-sized bones. I stood up and started backing away, trying not to make a sound. But at the same moment, he rolled the door up from the inside like he was going to go back and get something out of his truck. He just stood there, and so did I. He didn't look surprised to see me, and tried to break the awkward silence by telling me it wasn't what I thought it was, and that they were medical specimens that universities buy. I didn't say anything. I just turned around and walked out the way I had come in. He called out behind me, telling me not to be stupid, and that if I reported him, I'd be out of a job, and that he could easily get me in trouble with the police. I got back to my vehicle and left. Obviously, I called the cops immediately. I did not care if I was going to get fired for this. They showed up not long after and raided the unit. The story I heard was that when they arrived, he wasn't there, and neither were most of the remains. But then they went to the cemetery and found his truck there, and then found him trying to hide in the storage container with the other remains. I guess he thought if he moved them, he might be able to dodge the police before firing me and maybe buy himself a little time to cover his tracks. Guy was arrested. Turns out he'd been selling bones online to private collectors. Some of it went to black market dealers, some even went overseas. And yes, some were from children, from graves that hadn't been visited in decades. He kept records. They found notebooks, receipts, and emails. I still work at that cemetery, and I actually have his old job now. What pissed me off the most was wondering about all the families who assumed their loved ones were moved respectfully, buried with care. Meanwhile, some creep was pulling them apart like antiques. And the worst part is, he would have gotten away with it. No one noticed, except me. I'm a makeup artist, and I used to take all kinds of gigs when I was trying to build my portfolio early on. When you're starting out in a field like this, or really any creative field, you basically have to be willing to work for free and take any gig to build up experience so you can show other people what you've done. So you end up taking some pretty weird, unpaid, or low-paying gigs just to get the ball rolling. I had flyers and promos up all over the place, and one night I got a last-minute booking. Somebody contacted me through email and sent the details. The job description said that it was for a private drag event and they wanted their makeup done professionally. The address was a small suburban house in a quiet neighborhood. I remember it being really clean, no cars in the driveway, no lights on in any of the windows except one in the front. This was midwinter, by the way, so it got dark very early. I rang the bell, and this guy in maybe his late 40s answered the door wearing a bathrobe. His face was freshly washed, and he had a towel wrapped around his hair, like he'd just gotten out of the shower. I introduced myself and confirmed that this was the address, and that I was the makeup artist for the drag event. He just nodded and said something to the effect of, "She wants her jaw softened." I wasn't sure who he was talking about, so I asked if he was the performer. He didn't clarify, he just kind of mumbled something and ushered me inside. It wasn't the brightest decision I've made, but I was desperate to get my business going and I'd met plenty of eccentric people in this field, so I went along with it. We set up in the living room on a plastic folding table with a propped up vanity mirror. both of which looked brand new and never used before. The place was tidy and there were hardly any personal items anywhere. No photos on the wall, no clutter, just a pile of his clothing and belongings at the other end of the table. It felt almost like staged or something, or like an Airbnb. I don't really know how else to explain it. As I was setting up, I noticed this full outfit hanging on a door leading to another room at the back of the house, which I assumed was his costume. I noted it because it was not drag-like at all. It was just an average female outfit and very untheatrical, which is typically never what drag performers are going for. I laid out my kit and asked him a few standard questions, skin sensitivities, preferences, stuff like that. He kept saying things like she needs to look real and not to go too big. Typically, drag performers will do their own makeup, so I wasn't sure exactly what the deal with this guy was, whether or not he was doing this for the first time and wanted to learn, or if this was just some sort of one-off thing. It was weird, sure, but it wasn't the weirdest job I'd ever done, and once the ball got rolling, I knew I really wouldn't be there very long. He was super specific about the jawline, the eyebrows, and making the skin look very realistic and understated, but started getting frustrated with me when I kept trying to camp up his eyes with a touch of theatricality. He then reached under the pile of clothing at the end of the table and retrieved a photo, handing it to me. He told me it was a reference photo. The photograph was of a woman with her husband and kids. I was kind of thrown because typically a drag reference will come from either a magazine or like a screenshot from a movie or something. But this was just like a straight up actual film photo of a regular lady. I didn't understand the performative appeal of this at all, but at this point I just wanted to get through it, take some photos for my website, and be on my way. I told him I understood and was looking over the photo while digging through my case for a stippling sponge when all of a sudden something clicked in my brain. I looked at the photo one more time, then over at the outfit that I had seen earlier at the other end of the room. They were the same. The same color t-shirt, a pair of jeans distressed to look just like the ones in the photo, and a wig matching the woman's hair. I looked back at the photo and at the woman's family again, specifically at her husband, who in the photo had a beard and these piercing blue eyes. Then, I looked up from the photo into the mirror and caught the guy staring at me. It was that same piercing gaze. I stood there, almost 100% certain that the man in the photo with the beard was now my client who had shaven and was now attempting to disguise himself as his wife. I didn't want to let on what I was thinking, so I played it off like I was comparing his complexion to the woman in the photo and asked him a question about skin tone or something. At first, he didn't answer. He just stared at me like he could read my thoughts. But then, he answered my question, breaking eye contact, his eyes flicking down to the photo and then back to himself in the mirror. Something about the shift in his energy, something about how still he went, put every nerve in my body on alert. I couldn't tell if he knew that I was aware of what was going on or not. I kept working, trying to play it cool, but my mind was racing. This wasn't drag. This wasn't a performance. He was pretending to be someone else. He was trying to be her, his wife or ex-wife or whatever she was. I fumbled through my kit and mumbled something about needing to get some more concealer from my car. He nodded like he didn't really care. I kept my voice steady, told him I'd be right back, and grabbed my keys like it was nothing. The second I stepped outside and closed the door, I bolted for my car. I drove to the nearest gas station, parked under the lights, and just sat there trying to catch my breath. Then I called my older sister. She used to work in social services, and I didn't want to call the cops without knowing what the hell I was even reporting. She was silent for a few seconds, then asked me to describe the woman in the photo, the kids, and the house. She said it sounded like he was trying to disguise himself as her to get around some kind of restriction, like a custody issue or a restraining order. Maybe even to try and pick the kids up from school or daycare or an after-school game without being recognized. That possibility hit me like a punch in the chest. I called the non-emergency police line and gave them the address and everything I remembered. They said they'd send someone to check. A few days later, I followed up, and all they'd say was that the man had been spoken to. They wouldn't give me more details. Luckily, they were able to recover the kit that I had left there, and I was able to drive over and pick it up. I don't know if he ever went through with whatever he was planning, and I don't know if that woman is okay or if those kids are. But I'll always remember how blank his face looked when he said, "She needs to look real," like that woman was just a costume. I'm a struggling actor, early 30s, living in LA. When I first got to the city, I got involved with a very small agency. One of the things people might not know about LA is that for all the actors who are struggling to find work, there's also agents who are trying to make it as well. As desperate as you might be, I've learned you have to be careful about who you choose for an agent. Some of these people are so desperate that they'll send you out on sketchy jobs just to make a quick buck. So I get this call from the tiny agency I was with at the time. One of the regular gigs they would book was for these behavioral simulation role plays. These were gigs where you'd either pretend to be a medical patient or a doctor or a patient's family member or something. You would role play with real people who were training in the field in order to give them experience handling certain situations that they would encounter during their careers. I was told this gig was a one-on-one memory therapy session for an older woman dealing with early-stage dementia or trauma-related memory loss. The whole thing was to be supervised by a counselor, therapist, or doctor. So I took the bus out and showed up at this house in the valley. A woman answered the door and introduced herself as the doctor. She was dressed very casual, just jeans and a sweater, but she came across as very kind and open-hearted. She carried a clipboard and had a calm, professional vibe. She said she was a caseworker working with the state, and that the woman inside, her client, was trying an immersive memory recall therapy technique. She told me the woman's name and said that she might get confused, but to go along with whatever she came up with. My job was just to respond to a few memory prompts and to improvise if need be. There was a note sheet, basic stuff, dress casual, speak softly, let her lead the conversation. If things got intense, the doctor would step in. I was brought inside and sat down in the living room on a plastic-covered couch. Old photos hung on the wall that made it feel like the house hadn't changed in decades. Finally, the older lady was brought in by the doctor. She was probably in her late 60s, I'd guessed. Dressed neat, hair pulled back. She smiled at me, but didn't really look me in the eyes, more like she was looking past me or through me. Immediately, I felt bad for her. She sat down across from me, and the doctor introduced me with a different name other than my own. I assumed it was part of the exercise and didn't really think much of it. Then, the doctor prompted the older woman and asked her if there was anything she'd like to say to me. There was a pause, and then the older woman asked me if I remembered the old place, the one with the pear tree out back. I had no idea where this was going, but one of the rules of improv is to take what the other person says and just roll with it instead of rejecting it or shutting it down. I think I just nodded and said something along the lines of course I did, and that the pears from that tree were delicious or something. That seemed to land. She smiled, but it faded fast. Then, angrily, she told me that I had taken it from her. I didn't know what to say. I just looked over at the doctor, who nodded to me, and then told the woman I wasn't really sure what she meant and asked her what I had taken from her. She stared directly at me like she was furious with me, and then told me to stop pretending and that I knew what I had done in the shed. This is when things started to get uncomfortable and outside of my wheelhouse. I have worked in the past with doctors as well as patients and family members, etc., where there's an understanding that the whole thing is a role play for the sake of education, and I had done fine in those scenarios, but this was a totally different situation. This woman didn't seem to understand that this was a role play. She seemed to believe that I was actually this person who had wronged her, and now I didn't know how to proceed for the sake of her best interest or mine. I looked over at the doctor again, who once again gave me this nod as if to say, this is normal, just go with it. So I just said that I was sorry and that I didn't remember. She leaned forward, looking directly into my eyes, and told me not to lie to her. That I always lied, and that she knew I remembered what I'd done and to admit it. I tried to deflect, said something about being sorry and wanting to make it right. That seemed to calm her down a bit, but immediately she went even deeper with it and asked me why I had hurt him. This is when the doctor finally stepped in. She suggested that we take a quick break, but the old lady waved her off, saying she needed to finish this. Then, just like that, she stood up and walked out of the room. I looked over at the doctor and quietly tried to apologize, explaining this was not really what I had expected, but she didn't answer. She didn't even look at me. She just sat there, frozen, eyes on the doorway. I was about to suggest that maybe I leave so that I didn't exacerbate the situation when suddenly the old lady reappeared in the doorway, holding a kitchen knife in her hand. Her whole body was extremely tense, like she was furious and trying to suppress it. That was it for me. I held up my hands and explained that I was just an actor who had been brought out here to help. I told her my name and looked over at the doctor, who moved in fast, trying to talk her down, but the lady just stepped around her, blocking me from leaving the room. She looked at me and told me that she needed to hear me say it. She needed to hear me admit it. I was at a total loss. I looked at the doctor, who put a hand on the woman's shoulder and tried to take the knife out of her hand, telling her to calm down. But when I didn't respond, the lady just came at me. I panicked, tried to move around the couch, and managed to shove past her without harming her. Then I was out the front door, running down the street toward the same bus stop that I had gotten off at earlier when arriving. I was shaking so bad it took me the whole ride home to get myself together. I didn't call the cops. I know that might sound crazy, but the truth is, I couldn't even explain what had happened. It felt like a dream, and that if I tried, I'd come off like I was making it up, like I was some wuss actor looking for attention. Plus, what was I gonna say? That a confused old woman with early dementia came at me with a knife in her own house? I did call the agency the next day, told them the job had been misrepresented, that it got out of hand and I didn't feel safe. The guy on the phone just said he was sorry and that he wouldn't send me back out to that address again. That was it. No follow-up, no apology. I left that agency and haven't taken any more jobs like that since. I'd rather be broke and have no representation than be put into sketchy situations by someone who's so desperate to make a buck that they're willing to jeopardize my safety. I still think about that lady from time to time, the way she looked at me. Not like she was delusional, not like she was confused, like she knew me. Like something inside her was totally convinced I was someone who had done something awful, and that this was her one chance to finally make it right. At the end of the day, the truth is some people carry things so heavy they can't put them down. Not even when the person standing in front of them is a total stranger. Not even when it's all supposed to be pretend. I've been doing Uber on the side for a few years now. I'm a mother of two, and at the time that this story took place, I was finishing nursing school while working the night shift at a local hospital in the Southwest. On my off nights, it would sometimes take a day or so to adjust back to a regular sleeping schedule. So if I couldn't sleep, I would do rideshare stuff until I finally got tired and went home to bed. This happened somewhere a little past 2 a.m, and I just decided I was going to call it for the night. It'd been a long shift, nothing dramatic, just the usual late-night deliveries and tired airport drop-offs. I pulled into this 24-hour gas station on the edge of town. I topped off my tank, then pulled into a parking spot to grab a drink before heading home. The place was mostly empty, a couple cars parked near the pumps and one off to the side with nobody in it. I parked near the entrance, engine off, left the doors unlocked out of habit, and went inside. I wasn't going to be long. Inside, it was empty except for the guy behind the counter. I grabbed a bottle of water and used the restroom real quick. The whole thing was maybe 4 minutes tops. I didn't think anything of it and got back in my car. I got in, shut the door, put the bottle in the cup holder, and reached for my keys. That's when I saw it. In the rearview mirror, a glimpse of movement. At first, I thought it was maybe a coat or a blanket that my husband had left in the back. But then, it shifted. Someone was crouched on the floor in the back seat of my car. She was wearing a dirty hoodie, hood up, head low. I froze. My hand was still on the keys, but I didn't turn them. Then she looked up, just a little, and quietly begged me not to scream. I couldn't move, and the realization happened so fast I didn't have time to process it. My chest went tight. My first instinct was that this was a setup, that she was going to rob me or carjack me or something. But she kept whispering, begging me to help her and that she didn't want to die. Then she reached out and gently squeezed my arm. In the mirror, she looked young, early 20s maybe. Her face was pale and smudged with dirt. I looked down at her hand on my arm and saw red marks on her wrist coming out of the hoodie sleeve like someone had tied her up. She was talking so fast and my brain still wasn't sure what to make of the situation, so I barely kept up with what she was saying. That she escaped from a van that was parked behind the gas station. She said she'd gotten out through the passenger window while he was distracted and didn't know where else to go. I didn't know what to do. Again, this all happened so suddenly that I didn't have any time to even think clearly. I looked around the lot, trying to see this van that she was talking about. Then she whispered that he was here. I turned to look and saw a man walking across the lot from the far end. He was wearing jeans, boots, a black jacket, and a baseball cap. I couldn't see his face under the brim of the hat. I panicked and fumbled with my keys. It took me 2 tries to get them in. The girl ducked down again and started crying and freaking out, pushing herself as low and deep into the floor of the back seat as she could fit. The moment the car turned on, the man started running. I don't even remember putting it in reverse. I just remember the crack. Something heavy hit the back window. Maybe his fist, maybe something else, I don't know. It didn't break all the way, but it spiderwebbed across. The girl in the back seat completely lost her shit and I slammed on the gas. I didn't stop and I didn't look back. We hit the road and I just drove as fast as I could. I asked if she was okay and if she needed a hospital. She said no, just to take her to the police. The nearest station was maybe 15 to 20 minutes away. I pulled in fast, left the car running, and got her inside. Cops came out and took her in the back. One of them had me sit down and give a statement. Eventually, one of them came out and told me she'd been reported missing 2 days earlier. The police believed that she'd been picked up with the intention to traffic her. They sent units back to the gas station and the guy was already gone, but the van was still there, parked behind the building like she said. It had been wiped clean. No plates, nothing inside. The whole ordeal ended around 4 a.m. It was a total nightmare and I think about it all the time when I drive. I don't leave my doors unlocked anymore, not even to run inside for just a minute, not even in broad daylight. That night messed me up more than I'd like to admit. I don't know what would have happened if I'd come back a minute later, or if I'd chosen to lock my car, or if she hadn't gotten out of the van in time. I just know that that image is seared into my memory. That woman crouched in the back seat, whispering like her life depended on it. Because evidently, it did. I was a sophomore in college when this happened. My original roommate moved out mid-semester to go live with his girlfriend, and the school housing office placed someone new with me. 1 week he was gone, the next this other guy just showed up with a suitcase and a printed out room assignment. He was a quiet guy, really quiet. The day I met him, he didn't even make small talk, didn't ask where anything was, just nodded a little when I said hi and then immediately left the room. I figured he was maybe socially awkward, but whatever, I'm not exactly a chatterbox either. But there was definitely something off about him from the beginning. He didn't have a phone or a laptop, no TV, no headphones, nothing. He brought books, like actual hardcover books and notebooks. He had 4 or 5 of them, these thick ones, and he filled pages constantly. He'd sit at the desk at night and just write, or what I assumed was writing. No music, no background noise, just the sound of pen on paper. I had to wear headphones just so I could fall asleep. I didn't think a lot of it at first. Some people are just eccentric or anti-tech or whatever, and even I kind of hate how addicted I am to my phone and screens and all that. But it started to get weird. Like, I'd come back from class and he'd be sitting there facing the desk where a computer or monitor would be, but there was nothing in front of him. Just empty space. Not sleeping, just sitting. Sometimes I'd try to talk to him and say something like, "Hey, everything good?" And he'd just look at me like I'd interrupted something private. He never left the room when I did, and I mean never. I'd go to class, go to the gym, whatever, and whenever I came back, he'd be there. He never had food, I never saw him eat. Once or twice I think he went down to the vending machines, but that was it. He didn't use the communal kitchen, and I never saw him open or go into his suitcase. I honestly started wondering if he was even enrolled there. Then, one night, I got back from studying at the library and saw this collection of drawings on his bed. They were organized into groups on like a grid. I just stood there looking at them, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then it hit me. They were drawings of the campus. Just random spots. The dining hall, the quad, the bike racks outside, the rec center. Some were from inside the buildings, like the security desks or random hallways or stairwells. And there were hand-drawn maps with like routes and notes on them. The drawings weren't good. It definitely wasn't like they were from an art class or something. These were more instructional. Like if you were planning out a route or trying to visually memorize locations or something. It reminded me of someone using flashcards to learn a new language or conceptualize a complicated project. One of the drawings was of our dorm building, with all the doorways, elevators, stairwells, and emergency exits marked like a blueprint. It was so weird I didn't know what to do. I just kind of froze up in the moment, and of course, that's right when he walked in, saw me looking down at them, and calmly started picking them up. I remember he said it was, quote, for a project, but he didn't say anything else. Didn't explain it, didn't address it, nothing. Then he put them under his bed, and I had to just sit there in the room with him like it wasn't incredibly awkward for the rest of the evening. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about those drawings, about how many of them there were, how instructional they were, and about the way he always seemed to be watching something at his desk, even when he wasn't looking at anything, like he was endlessly thinking through something complicated. A couple days later, I pretended to head out for a late class, but doubled back. I just had this gut feeling. I peeked through the crack in the door and saw him standing at my desk, flipping through my planner. It didn't look like he was looking for anything specific, just reading it, slowly. Then he opened the top drawer of my dresser and started going through my clothing, looking at them like he was trying to gauge if they would fit him or not. I stepped in and said something like, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" He slammed it shut, looked up, didn't even flinch, and told me that I had left it open and he was closing it for me. I reported it to housing the next day. I didn't go into huge detail, just said that I was uncomfortable and that he'd been touching my stuff. A week went by and nothing happened. He was still there, still scribbling in his notebook, still doing whatever it was he was doing. Then, one night, I woke up and saw him sitting on the edge of his bed, facing my side of the room. Not moving, just sitting in the dark on the edge of his bed. If you've ever slept in a dorm, you know that means this guy was literally sitting awake, like 4 feet away from my head while I had just been laying there. I pretended to still be asleep until eventually, literally like 10 minutes later, I finally heard him lay down and go to sleep. I basically didn't sleep until the weekend and had to go home for a couple nights just to get away. When I came back, he was gone. No warning, no note, just gone. His bed was stripped and his desk was cleared. I asked around and someone on the floor below said they saw campus security escorting him out the night before. Later, I overheard one of the RAs talking about how he wasn't even supposed to be living in our dorm. Apparently, he wasn't officially placed there. No one knows how he got the key or who approved his paperwork. I never got a straight answer from housing. Just an email saying the matter had been resolved and that my new roommate would be arriving within the week. I ended up getting a job and moving off campus after that. I don't know what that guy was doing. I don't know what he was planning. But every now and then, I still wonder if any of those drawings were of me. Several years ago, one of my granddaughters asked if her friend could stay with me for a little while. I guess her home life had some sort of issue. I was told something about a fire. I wasn't really clear on the details, but I said yes. I had the space and I figured I could use the company. Her name was Kim. She was polite and soft-spoken. She thanked me over and over for letting her stay and offered to help me with dishes and vacuuming. I told her she didn't have to, but she insisted. I noticed early on that the way she moved around the house was a bit odd, like she preferred not to be seen. For the first week or so, nothing seemed wrong. She mostly stayed in the guest room, slept during the day, and was up most of the night. I didn't think too much about it, honestly. College kids have college kid schedules. But then, my spidey senses started going off. I'd find the bathroom light on in the middle of the night, or my toothbrush moved, or a cabinet left open. At first, I thought maybe I was being forgetful, overthinking it, or was too used to living alone and needed to relax. But one afternoon, I went to take some Tylenol and noticed one of my old pill bottles had been moved around. It was old and not even a prescription I used. It was from when my husband had cancer. I had never thrown it away, just shoved it in the back of the bathroom cabinet and forgotten about it. It was still about half full and my curiosity got the better of me, so I counted the pills. Honestly, I couldn't tell if any of them were even missing because I had never gone through them before, but I just wanted to have a baseline going forward. That night, I ran into Kim in the kitchen. I tried speaking with her, and even though she was a shy person, it was a stranger encounter than usual. The one time she made eye contact with me, I noticed her eyes were dilated, and then I saw her hand shaking when she poured herself a glass of water from the Brita before going back to her room for the night. I thought she might have been stoned or something. I'm not a prude or anything like that. When I was a student, I had my fair share of fun, but this was just an odd vibe. And it continued. Not constantly, but now and then I'd look up and catch her standing down a hallway or in a doorway staring into the room like she was watching to see if I was paying attention or something. Then, one night, around 3 a.m, I woke up to the sound of something clattering in the bathroom. The sound of plastic containers falling on the tile. I got up, quietly opened my door, and saw the light from the bathroom spilling out into the hallway. I quietly walked up to the doorway and saw Kim crouched on the floor, digging through my old toiletry bag. My entire medicine cabinet had been emptied all over the bathroom floor. Bottles and containers were everywhere. She had my husband's pill bottle in her hand and was shaking it like she couldn't believe it was almost empty. Her skin looked all pale and clammy like she was sick. She was whispering to herself in this manic state. I quietly said her name and asked her what she was doing. She looked up and froze. Her eyes were completely unfocused. Then, slowly, she got to her feet, still holding the pill bottle. There was this awkward silence between us. Then all she said was, "You don't even use them. They're just sitting there." I told her to put them back. She didn't move. I couldn't tell if she was high or going through withdrawal or what, but something had changed in her face. It was like you could just feel this rage or desperation coming off of her. I know I'm not doing the greatest job of describing it, but it was like if you've ever had an encounter with someone who you just knew could snap into real violence at any moment, then you know the exact type of tension that I'm talking about. She took a step toward me, and I backed up into the hallway and told her to stop and to leave immediately. I said I was going to call my son, my granddaughter, and the police. She blinked a few times, like she was waking up from a spell. Then she dropped the bottle on the floor, turned around, and walked out the front door, barefoot. I locked the door behind her and sat there trying to figure out what had just happened. My granddaughter came by the next day, crying. Said Kim had a history but swore she was clean. Told my granddaughter she hadn't been using since her last stint in rehab a year ago. I could tell she felt terrible and didn't press for details. But the whole context of the visit had changed, and I wasn't even sure if my granddaughter fully understood whether Kim was even telling the truth about why she needed somewhere to stay in the first place, or if I had been lied to. She took Kim's things with her and somehow managed to return them to her. I threw out every old medication in the house that afternoon. That girl never came back, But I'll tell you what, I still remember that look in her eyes when she realized I was awake, and her wild energy, like she was willing to do whatever it took to get what she needed in that moment. My cousin moved into my basement the year he got divorced. It wasn't a permanent thing, just a few weeks until he figured things out. I was the one who offered, actually. Our family had always been close, and when he lost the house and things got ugly with his ex, it felt like the right thing to do. I live in a 2-story place with a furnished basement. It's not fancy by any stretch, but it's got a private bathroom, a little kitchenette, and a separate entrance. He could basically come and go without bothering anyone, which seemed ideal. My daughter was 15 at the time, and I figured they'd mostly stay out of each other's way. At first, it was fine. He was respectful and kept to himself. He'd always been a little standoffish, but that was just his personality. It never felt like he was trying to be rude. He paid me a little rent too, even though I hadn't asked for it. If anything, I started to feel guilty that I hadn't been more involved when he was going through the worst of it. But then, small things started making me feel off. Like one morning, I came downstairs and noticed the side door was unlocked. I always double check it before I go to bed. Then, my daughter mentioned something in passing, that she thought she saw my cousin sitting in the living room in the dark in the middle of the night when she got up to go to the bathroom. That should have been a bigger red flag than it was, but I didn't want to overreact. I just told her to let me know if she saw anything else weird. A few days later, I noticed a drawer in my bedroom had been left open. Not wide, just like an inch or two. I'm pretty OCD, so something like that definitely stands out to me. I keep a small lockbox in there with some old family photos, stuff from when my husband was still alive. I checked it and everything was still there, but it still didn't sit right with me. Then, there was this one afternoon when I came home early from work and found my cousin in the first floor living room looking through the couch cushions. I could tell by the way he was acting that he didn't expect me to have gotten home when I did, just very awkward and cagey. I asked if everything was okay and he mumbled something about misplacing his keys and then went back down to the basement. It was definitely weird. It's not that he wasn't allowed upstairs, but he didn't have any reason to be up there. Everything he needed was down in the basement. I started locking my bedroom door at night, not because anything specific had happened, but because I felt watched. It was like this slow crawl of discomfort. Not a single big thing, just a bunch of little things piling up. My daughter even started spending more time at friends' houses, said the house felt heavy. The breaking point came one evening when I went down to the basement to ask my cousin if he wanted a plate of dinner. His door was closed, but I knocked and waited. No answer. I figured he was out, but as I turned to leave, I heard a noise, like a quick shuffle, like someone trying to stay quiet. I reflexively opened the door. He was sitting there, on the bed, fully dressed, just staring at me. Not angry, not embarrassed, just calm. Next to him, on the nightstand, was my daughter's hairbrush. Neither of us had even realized it was missing. He saw me looking and followed my gaze directly toward the brush. When he realized what I was looking at, he reached out, picked it up, and held it out to me, saying something like, "Oh, I found this. I think it was lost." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just closed the door and went back upstairs, locked every door that I could. The next day, I had my daughter clean the living room. While she was vacuuming, she found something under the couch. I didn't even know what it was at first. She had to explain to me that it was called an SD card, like the kind you put in a camera. Neither of us recognized it as ours. We plugged it into her laptop and opened it up. There were videos, dozens of them, taken from inside our house. Most were grainy from odd angles, like between furniture pieces or behind objects peeking out into rooms. Some were short, just a minute or two. Others went on and on for like 20 minutes at a time. A few were of me, most were of my daughter. Nothing was explicit, thank God, but it was absolutely inappropriate regardless, and certainly creepy enough to kick him out immediately, though I didn't know how I should approach it. I called my brother that night and told him everything. He and my cousin had been closer growing up, and I figured maybe he'd have more luck handling it. He agreed it was time for him to go and said he would come over while my daughter and I were out and make it happen. We left, and when we got back later that night, my cousin's things were gone and neither of them were there. My brother called to tell me it was taken care of, but told me I should contact the police and give them the SD card anyway. I was initially opposed to this because I didn't want to create an even bigger deal out of it than it already was, but because of the nature of the situation, I felt like the police should at least be aware of the incident in the event that my cousin might do something like this to someone else in the future. I called them. They came over and I answered questions and gave them the SD card. I haven't spoken to my cousin since. Last I heard, he had moved far away. My daughter won't even say his name. Sometimes, even now, I find myself checking behind lamps or couch cushions for hidden cameras before realizing what I'm doing is ridiculous. I also triple check every lock in the house before bed, even the one on my bedroom door.